Not the day. I wasn't prepared for a camera. I haven't
That's
done
all
my
right. I
workout yet.
ambush you. All right, you ready? Here we go. All
Yeah, let's
right,
go.
folks. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome down the security rabbit hole to yet another edition of that famous Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. Y'all are sitting shotgun here with myself because James is out doing James things. Life gets in the way sometimes. Boy, don't I know it lately. All right, well, another year, another CrowdStrike Global Threat Report, another another chance to hang out with Adam from his bunker. Hey, buddy. Hey, buddy. How are you?
Down here in the undisclosed location.
The undisclosed location under a building. Yes. So another year, man. Give us the well. Before we get into the report, what's changed? I mean, how's the business changed? How's what you guys are doing changed? Is there anything year over year that's different?
I mean, we're still, kind of evolving with the threat, and we continue to innovate around these threat actors, which is really, I think, the impetus for this report, the ninth one, and trying to just think about, what's changing, because it is changing, and it's changing the technology that people need and the investments that they need to make to secure themselves.
So, I mean, 9 now. That's a lot. That's a significant sample size in terms of years.
Mm-hmm.
We've often said that that this industry sort of forgets its past, and then we kind of repeat it over and over and over and over. Are we in? Are we in one of those cycles?
I don't think. I think what happens is that what's old is new again. I wouldn't say that we're repeating the past, right? But for example, we high level numbers, right? We saw that we added 33 new actors in the last
Holy
year,
cow!
right? That's significant. These are nation
Yeah, it
states.
is.
These are criminals. These are hacktivists. I think hacktivism is definitely something that we're seeing more of in the last couple of years than for years past. And some of the things that we're seeing that are new, the threats to the cloud, right? Those are emergent, and we're seeing also the weaponization of data is really becoming a problem. And both
Okay.
of those things necessitate some different types of tools to help secure those environments.
So the hacktivism part, does that have anything to do with the thing that's going on over there in Eastern Europe?
Yeah, there's certainly some of that in pro and anti-Russian hacktivists, but also all over Latin America. There's groups like Guacamaya that
Okay.
have been actually impacting the political landscape in Latin America, South America. We've seen it in the Middle East as well. So, and here domestically, here in the U.S., we've seen that hacktivism has been a factor. So, I think more, and I think it's a little bit about the ease of doing this stuff, right? It's no longer just DDoS attacks, though we tend to see that with the pro anti-Russian groups, but it's back to data extortion, data leaks, data weaponization. And these hacktivist groups are stealing sensitive information and using it to try to literally change the political landscape.
Is it working?
Yeah, in some places
I mean, I guess they
it
wouldn't do it,
certainly
right,
is.
if it wasn't working.
Well, I mean, they would do it if it wasn't working, but the fact that it is working, I think, is indicative of the fact that you can create a scandal, and you could take and the hacktivists, they're really just taking things and leaking them. When we start to look at some of the national security threats, groups like Gossamer Bear, they're stealing things, and they're maybe kind of misrepresenting them, or they've got like a much more advanced way of kind of handling that information. They could even doctor it and manifest things that aren't real, as we've seen for years from Russian threat actors, for sure.
Yeah.
But this whole trend of going after the data is a thing that I think people need to be really worried about. We saw just on the e-crime side, for example, there was 20% of the ransomware groups aren't doing ransomware anymore. They're just doing data extortion. And the
Oh,
big news
well,
in the
that's
last
different. Hold on. Well, hold on. Let's dive into that. That's a juicy tidbit because we've been talking cyber insurance quite a bit on the show, and that's all pivoted around, like, our national cyber strategies pivoted around ransomware pretty heavily. So, are we behind the times because now we're doing data extortion, or is that something similar?
Well, think of it this way, right? There's two things I would say about this. One is the calculus of ransomware is predicated on downtime, meaning that it's how much downtime are you able to sustain before it's cheaper to pay the ransom. With data extortion, that calculus is changing. Now the calculus is, what is the legal, regulatory, compliance impact of this data getting published without our consent, right? This could be sensitive customer information, healthcare records, any number of things. And that's not a how long before, that's instant, right? That's instantaneous, that it's $100 million problem versus a $10 million extortion demand.
Okay. And that's on the, and that's, you said that's ramping up, huh? Interesting. What's the difference in defensive strategy between the two? Anything?
Well, yeah, and the way that a lot of these things are kind of playing out is that they're coming in with legitimate credentials, or they're buying stolen credentials, or they're phishing, or I mean, just today there was or yesterday I should say, that there was a Microsoft vulnerability in Outlook where you could send somebody a properly formatted meeting invite, and it will force NTLM authentication to an arbitrary server, right? So there's lots of ways to get those credentials. And once you have those credentials, the other stat that's in this report, 70% of the attacks were malware free. Hands on keyboard, they didn't bring malware. And when you think about ransomware, with all the EDRs that are out there, and obviously things like Falcon, CrowdStrike Falcon, it's detecting and stopping this ransomware as it's executing, as it's starting to run. And this is this is creating a problem for these threat actors. So if they could come in with legitimate hands-on keyboard, live off the land, and not bring that malware, it makes it easier. And not to mention the fact, ransomware encryption is hard, right? And running encryption across multiple systems is hard, and managing the keys is hard. You can remove all of that by moving to pure data extortion.
So, okay, we've hit on two things that are interesting to me. One, like literally the first half of what you said was stolen credentials, phishing, right? Legitimate credentials. It seems to be, we have been saying for a long time that the collective we have been saying for a long time that identity is becoming sort of a thing that you have to defend like nothing else.
Yep.
And the second part of what you said was malware free. I want to get to that in a second, but let's start with the credentials piece, because that to me is actually generationally different than, because there's not okay, somebody's going to say, yes, there is, but there's not a good set of tools that you're going to go, oh, give me the signatures for, this attack, right? Because it's somebody with legitimate credentials that's doing something that is either slightly out of pattern or coming from a different place or something.
This
right?
is
so
a
you have
science
to
problem, right?
It's right. It's a data. It's a science problem. Yep.
Machine learning and artificial intelligence to be building, profiles, right? If Raf logs in from Atlanta every day and uses an iPhone for multi-factor, and all of a sudden he's coming in from Lahore, Pakistan with an Android, right? You don't need somebody to tell you, like, that's not correct, right? That there's something odd going on there. And that's, effectively where identity protection really comes into play. And I always like to quote Ronald Reagan, where he said, trust but verify, right? As an industry, that's really what we've been doing. But now we have to flip that paradigm upside down, and it's no longer trust but verify, it's verify, then trust. And that's critical, right? And we need to be able to kind of put those gates up around the users. And with EDR, you network contain a device, an endpoint. We need to be able to network contain a user, because if that user is coming in across any number of possible devices, until you have the controls around that user, you're really going to be in trouble. And the other thing that's really interesting here is, if you look at the playbook, right, and to kind of where you started this discussion, what's old is new again. Look, I think the industry should get the credit, right? And enterprises should get the credit. They've implemented robust backup solutions in many cases, right? And they understand with ransomware, the way you defeat that is to restore from backup, kick out the threat actor, not in that order, and then make sure that it doesn't happen again. And that more and more organizations, I think, are telling these ransomware actors, pound sand. The other thing that comes from this too is that there is this whole issue with the ransomware playbook, right? So when you're negotiating a ransom situation, the way it typically goes down is, it's like a hostage situation in a movie, right? Where they take a bunch of hostages. I got heat stuck in my head, right? It's like in a bank, and they call the cops, and they're like, all right, look,
Love that movie.
we want a helicopter and pizzas, or we're going to start executing people. And the cops are like, well, we can't get you the helicopter. We got to clear the airspace, yada, yada, yada. But what we can do is we get you the pizzas, but you have to do something for us. You have to let some of those hostages out, let out the sick people or the injured or the women and children, whatever it is. And we'll give you the pizzas, right? And now you start negotiating. You start taking things away from them. You start grinding them down, and you start hoping they make a mistake that you can capitalize on. And with ransomware, it's the same thing, right? Oh, I don't know what Bitcoin is, or I'm not authorized, and so they try to drag that negotiation out, one, to grind them down on price, but also two, to try to increase the chance that they make a mistake or that they do something stupid. And the threat actors hate that playbook, right? It works, it's effective. And with data extortion, it's more like a express kidnapping rather than rather than saying, the $100,000, well, I got 50. An express kidnapping, they say, all right, well, we'll send you a couple of fingers. And with data extortion, it's the same thing, right? So, I don't know, I'm not authorized, I can't move the Bitcoin. The threat actor comes back and says, all right, well, we're going to leak 10 gig of your sensitive data. Let's see if you figure it out, right? And so that's how that whole kind of thing is changing. And just a few weeks ago, people have been really talking about ransomware has been down over the last year. Maybe it's because of the war in Ukraine. Maybe it's because of this. Maybe it's because of that. Maybe it's because they're moving to data extortion. And in the threat report, we say 20% of the threat actors are doing just that.
So I'm still stuck on identity because you're right. It's this concept of containing an identity is a little bit more difficult than simply quarantining a machine, right? You have to know where that person is. This is forcing, and I don't know if forcing is the right word because I can't imagine the world without this thing, but security tools to be integrated with the ID systems, not just with other security tools, not like firewalls and endpoint security stuff, but like the part of the incident response process, right? Once Falcon detects a bad actor, you have to go tell the ID system that, hey, nix that dude, like kill that ID. In fact, kill all the places where that ID is logged in right now. Not wait for those tokens to expire in 24, 48 hours, but like kill those sessions right now. And there's a lot
unless Falcon is integrated with the identity protection system as we
fair enough. I guess I gave you a softball there. Nicely done. So yeah, I give you one, you smack it. Good job. But there are plenty of, I could probably think of like 3 that I use in the last 24 hours, where even if you lock my ID right now, I've probably got 24 hours of using the thing before like it really expires on all the places that I can use it.
You're talking about the sessions.
The sessions, yes.
Yeah, I mean you can remove those sessions too, right? That's not right. Unchallenging problem. But I think the biggest issue is that organizations aren't actually investing in this stuff, and that's where the problem is, right? And so until that hits that threshold where they realize, data extortion is a bigger problem than ransomware, that's when you'll start to actually see people investing in this type of technology.
It's funny because I think companies have just gotten to the point where they're like, oh hell, all right, fine, we'll take ransomware seriously. As the bad guys move on to the next thing, and now it's like, wait, you're telling me my security tools actually have to be integrated with modern, updated identity management and perimeter and application tools? Oh.
And you have to do zero trust, right? Zero trust isn't just as simple as putting that identity tool out there, right? That's kind of the security guard outside, right? You still have to limit the access of who has access to what, and you need to be rolling out really granular access control to that data, which is the other piece of this puzzle. And that is also a lot of tools don't have that capability.
Well, I got to tell you, I've worked at companies in my past that if you ask, even the smaller ones, if you said, hey, In 3 months, let's give it a nice runway. In 3 months, we expect all privilege to be locked down to least, absolutely least privilege. They'd be like, can't do it. Don't know it. Can't do it. Not possible. And then you go like on the global scale, right? You look at the big megacorps. The tools because you join the company, you get access to system. You're an accountant. You get access to system A, B, and C, and your workstation and some shared drives. You get moved to a different department. Nobody ever takes away that old access. And now you've got additive, and over the course of 3 to 5 years, you basically got access to everything.
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, I think that is certainly possible, but it shouldn't be a reason not to do it, right? Like,
no, I know
a little bit
I'm not
of
arguing
identity
that.
protection. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not arguing that. I'm simply saying that the argument for, well, can't we just get better security tools is like that I'm anticipating the argument in my head, because that's the hard thing, right? Structuring your entire IT environment to work together well with your security tools, to orchestrate each other, to be able to do least privilege. Because zero trust, everybody talked about zero trust, and it's like, oh yeah, well, we'll just install this and do this and this. You're like, yeah, but all the legacy stuff, you can't just keep doing things the way we've been doing things. There's a generational change.
That's a startup waiting to happen, right? We're going to use blockchain, and we're going to use artificial intelligence to automatically profile data and figure out who needs access to what, and proactively figure out what they're going to need access to before they even know they need access to it. And these are crimes.
Yeah, I remember. God, I was working. I think it was back in my GE days, so early on, early 2000s. We had a vendor that came to us and said, I can identify within 48 hours of being plugged into your system. I can profile every user on your system, tell you what they generationally do, what their job is, and how to classify them. I was like, okay, how many things do you need to be plugged into? They're like, just a few. Just kidding, all of them. I was like, yeah.
Just put us on a network tab and we'll monitor SMB, and we'll go from there.
But that was the ask. Like, yeah, we'll just integrate. We'll just we'll watch your network. I mean, there was a specific tech I'm talking about. I think you know which one I'm talking about, right? It was the network component. I gotta say, nowadays though, you can actually do a fair bit of profiling by simply passively watching the network. Although that's not the entire thing.
NetWitness was doing that in the mid 2008 timeframe.
Yeah. I think Silent Runner was the app that I was thinking of that we had way. Remember Silent Runner?
Mm-mm.
It was one of those like, I think it was a precursor. I think I got that name right. It's been a long time, 20 some odd years, but
20 anyway, years. Hopefully they've advanced some of those techs to be a little bit more, and incorporate directories of service and all that other stuff. But the other thing in this global threat report, as we touch on this stuff, is cloud. We saw a 95% increase in exploitation of the cloud. We saw a threefold to 288% increase in threat actors who are what we call cloud conscious, right? You operate in the cloud, and we're down the security rabbit hole, so I'll go a little bit geekier here than I typically would. But as you start to look at how you would conduct an intrusion in a typical enterprise, right? You're going to do like network scanning with Nmap or something. You're going to incorporate lots of different kind of tools that you bring with you, or maybe live off the land. When you're doing that in the cloud, it's different, right? You don't do reconnaissance by port scanning all the boxes in the cloud. You're going to do it by going into the itemized billing. You're going to go through some API that gives you the ability to reconnoiter the entire operation. And that's a cloud conscious actor, right? They understand, if I'm in Microsoft Azure, I have to do it a certain way. If I'm in a different cloud, I have to do it a different way. And that threat is here today, right? And this is new, right? This is something that for years, a year ago on the 8th global threat report, if you were like, Adam, what's going on with the cloud? I'd say coin mining. Watch out for coin mining in the cloud. They're gonna mine some coin. But now that we're seeing real intrusions, and in the span of a year, they've really ratcheted that up. And organizations similarly can't rely on traditional enterprise protection. They need to be looking at things like cloud native application protection platforms, CNAPP, things that will enable them to look, because from a cloud perspective, you have two things. One, you have a posture problem, right? Which is it's secure out of the box generally. The problem is when you start to modify it and to customize it, you make it less secure. And so
what
you really
configuration
need
changes
to,
have you made?
yeah, exactly. So you need to look at that posture and say what's changed and what's not secure now. Did I open up permissions on some data store that shouldn't have been there, or have I exposed some API that shouldn't be exposed? And that CNAP really allows you to kind of look at that posture at a snap point in time, and then also continuously monitor for changes. And now you can get alerts of, hey, Roth just modified this permission and that just opened up a hole over here, so you need to fix it, right? And so you know, as we think about the world today, I think organizations have gotten message about endpoint security, right? They're increasingly using EDR and really up leveling and using machine learning and artificial intelligence and all the things that come with, you know, the modern EDR platform, and it goes into cloud workloads and things. That's great. What they need to also be looking at now is how can we invest in identity, and, you know, the economy being what it is, right? Like, are you gonna keep hiring people to do this problem? Probably not. You probably need to look at
it's not a people problem. It's not a hire more people. I will argue it has never really been a hire more people problem. It's fair. You know, the scale at which we needed to do that was incredible. I'm intrigued by the move to the cloud for the threat actors, because there was an article I think I read it's been a while, probably a year plus, where they talked about the different number, the number of configuration options for an identity in AWS, like all the entitlements that you could have. And it was like, the number was almost like 300 something, like all the different things you could do. How is any human being supposed to do that?
That's not even that bad. Look at like Microsoft Azure, right? How many organizations have moved to M365 from running their own enterprise? I mean, a lot. Microsoft Exchange was decimated over the last 2 years with vulnerabilities, right? Like proxy log on and proxy not log on, all these different vulnerabilities that have come out, chained together. And, you know, the message I think became, the mantra was, you know, don't do it on-prem, right? Move it into the cloud. And so as you start looking at things like Azure AD and how you're integrating your enterprise directory services with Microsoft Azure and how you're trying to integrate those things. I mean, if you tried running a Windows domain, that's complicated. If you tried running a Windows and hybrid Azure AD domain, that's a tough one.
Yeah, it is. So, all right, let's take a pivot, because I wanted to go back into because cloud is one that we could talk about for hours. I think I want to come back to this in a second, but talk to me about the concept of because malware-free attacks. I think I think most of my listeners kind of get this. I get it, but give us a kind of a primer on what the hell that means.
Well, let me tell you a story of how some of these threat actors work, right? Like, there's a $1 trillion company out there that was impacted by a group called Lapsus, right? This is, you know, one individual from Lapsus was arrested, a 17-year-old kid in Oxford. And the way that they were getting in was by getting stolen credentials. Whether those credentials came from an info stealer that was deployed to somebody's, you know, home machine and they logged in, or maybe it was at an airport or a hotel, or they were phished, right? If you look at stuff like EvilGenix 2 is a really cool phishing framework for doing this type of stuff. Or they, you know, somehow got those compromised credentials. Once you get those compromised credentials, or in the case of China, they were going after very heavily, like VPN. They had exploits for VPN devices, and they would just dump them off of those, right? And so once you have those credentials and you log in as a legitimate user, you're in, right? Now you just move laterally, right? You could do that by living off the land. Maybe you need to dump some creds or something like that. You know, you could certainly bring Mimikatz in various configurations. You could deploy CrowdStrike or something as a post-exploitation toolkit, you know, if you need to. But, you know, they can move laterally, and just getting those credentials, for example, and you get into something like Okta or something, and you could see all of the tiles. Now you have access to all of the source code, all of Slack, all of this stuff. If you get the right account, you don't even need to bring any living off the land techniques or any specific tooling like CrowdStrike. You literally just log in. If you happen to get an admin account and you log in, you could get all of Slack. Think about what people share on Slack. passwords, API keys, right? And it's a massive information. You get into their source repos through the same thing, right? So, all of these things have simplified the login process. But if you're a bad actor that's compromised credentials, really the only thing stopping you from getting away with it right now is multi-factor authentication. And the only way that you can ensure that somebody hasn't social engineered through that multi-factor authentication is with identity protection.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of the things that I use, I noticed over the last couple of years have gone to like a Google Authenticator or a push to like, hey, is this you logging in? And you go, yes, that's me.
And so that's MFA fatigue attack, right? And that is something we've seen a lot of in the last year or two, where let's say Ralph has a VPN and I compromise your creds, and I know that you're in Atlanta or on the East Coast, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to wait till 2:00 in the morning, and I'm just going to keep pushing it and keep pushing it and keep pushing it. And eventually you're going to wake up and you're going to be like, oh, my VPN or whatever. And you're just going to accept it because you want to go back to bed.
Yeah.
And now I'm in. Or I keep pushing it. You don't fall for it. You're like, And then I call you up and I'm like, hey, this is Adam from IT. And I see you've had some multi-factor authentication problems over the last couple of hours. There was a sync issue between the servers. Here's what we'll do. Let me push you one more. And then you can just accept that. And then hopefully that should take care of the synchronization issue. If you have any other problems, just reach back out to IT.
Nice.
Right. And now
nice. Yeah. See, that kind of stuff, the getting at people while they're dropping their kids off at school, while they're in the, in sitting in traffic trying to sleep, really kind of getting to you when you just want to be left the hell alone or get things done on your personal life. That right, and that's an interesting one. So what else is let's go back to the cloud conversation a bit here. For a long time, I have heard cloud providers tell me, and proponents of everything is code and the cloud will save us kinds of folks. They're like, oh man, you know what? Those EDR tools, those endpoint tools, no longer relevant in the cloud. I've never really necessarily agreed with that, because there's going to be native things right within the APIs, within the frameworks, within the cloud itself. However, you still want to see what's happening inside that if you've got VMs, right? Well, if you're not, everything's not a function, you still want to see what's going on underneath.
Let's be clear, right? Cloud is not a catch-all for all things, right? You have cloud as infrastructure. And for that, you do want cloud workload protection, right? You want those EDR, monitors inside of those cloud environments, because what you're effectively doing, and you've probably heard people say, well, isn't the cloud just using somebody else's computer? With cloud infrastructure, absolutely. When you start looking at, are you using O365, M365, whatever they call it these days, then you're not using that as an infrastructure. You're not going to deploy cloud workload protection necessarily into that. You do want to, however, be looking at the configuration of that from externally and running some tests, right? Like you can integrate this into M365 or whatever it is, Google Cloud or whatever, and now you've got some posture protection on top of that. Or you're building, you're building complex systems with, Hadoop or something like that are cloud-based systems, And so similar thing where you're not running that system, you're just running that data set. So now you have to wrap the controls around that. So depending on what part of the cloud you're using and how you're using it, it's not a one-stop solution. You have to think about how you're using the cloud and what tools you need.
Are the security teams that you guys work with, I understand there might be a little bit of a sample bias here, but are the security teams that you guys work with, are they well enough versed in cloud tech as fast as it evolves to really be able to be effective for themselves?
It depends. I mean, we work with organizations that are very tiny, organizations that are very big. And it's a hodgepodge, right? It's really different across every team. And with well, at least in recent years, with the amount of people that were moving between jobs, they take some of that institutional knowledge with them, and that actually changes the
Yeah.
how much they do or do not know about the cloud.
Where is we got a couple of minutes here. Where do you see things changing for the 10th iteration and beyond? Like what, the change to extortion has been interesting. The move into cloud more effectively has been interesting. What's next?
I think, and the things that I feel comfortable prognosticating, or is that the word, prognosticating?
Yeah, that's prognosticating.
Okay. Thank you for being my thesaurus. So, I think data extortion continues to grow. I think we see more and more threat actors moving that way. I think ransomware will continue to go down, and we need to be very careful about saying, oh, the ransomware problem has been solved. Well, yes, but we created this other problem over here of data extortion and other types of impact there. I think that we'll continue to see. One of the things that we mentioned in the report that we didn't really talk about here was China exploitation. China a couple of years ago mandated that all security research doesn't, typically here we go through kind of the responsible disclosure process where you reach out to the vendor, and I won't go through it all, but in China, their responsible disclosure process starts by telling the CNITSEC, which is a government agency, what you found. And then they, by the way, report up to the Ministry of State Security, which is an intelligence service. And they have this, now they can decide which ones they're going to go to the vendor and which ones they're going to use for themselves. And so we've seen a massive uptick in Chinese exploitation activity against enterprise products that are likely the result of that process.
That's interesting.
And a good example of where that and how they enforce that is with social credit and corporate social credit. So with things like Log4j, the Chinese government was really annoyed with Alibaba, who identified that and reported it to Apache. They didn't go through the CNITSEC, and they got into a lot of trouble for that. So we're seeing more and more enterprise exploits, and when they're not going through that vulnerability disclosure process, they're in the wild for longer until somebody finds it in an IR or something like that. So they've really up-leveled their capability there, and the Chinese are aggressive. We, in the last year, have observed them targeting, I think it was every geographic vertical that we track and every business vertical that we track. We're seeing Chinese intrusion activity, and they are steadfast marching towards this kind of goal of being a regional and ultimately a global hegemon. They want to be calling the shots. They want to push their influence into Latin America, South America, Africa, Middle East, Eurasia, wherever they can. You go around the world and you look at where high-speed rail and ports and all of these projects are being pushed by the Chinese. They're doing it for cheaper than their competitors. Because they, by the way, know what the negotiation is going to look like, because they're using cyber espionage to drive it. And then once they get in after lowballing that bid, now they're able to bring other technology. They're able to bring things like ZTE and Huawei, and they're putting people on the ground, and now they've got that influence, and that country becomes more and more dependent on China. So when it comes to a political decision or some sort of international issue that occurs, now they can start leveraging that dependency to get influence.
That's interesting. Well, that is a fun conversation for maybe a follow-up to this. Hey, tell people where they can go read up on this thing.
So what you can do is go to CrowdStrike to get the global threat report. But the other thing that we just unveiled, and I'm really excited about this, is something we call the adversary universe. It's existed for a while, but we rolled it back out. And one of the things that I always do when I talk to boards or I talk to the executive suite is I kind of show them the threat landscape of the 200 plus threat actors that we track. And I'm like, this is really scary. But here's the good news. Here's which of those threat actors target your business vertical, target your geolocation. And these are the ones that you need to protect against. And if you understand how they operate and what their techniques are, you could focus on bringing the right security investment to counter those threats. And now with this new adversary universe, you can go to adversary.crowdstrike.com. You can put in your business verticals, right? You could pick which ones you want. You can put in your
Oh, that's cool.
geolocations, and it'll give you a custom threat map that you can download and stick it right into that board deck to explain to them why they need to invest in specific technologies or capabilities to help better defend the business.
Okay, that's cool. Anything you can do to prepare people better is always helpful. Adam, thanks for joining us one more time. Riveting conversation as always. Man, I every time we talk about this stuff, there's always something new. There's always the bad guys always innovate. It's this sort of, it's easy to 20 years ago have this vision of threat actors as these, young sprightly kids just having some fun, and then like just knuckle dragger type of like just oh, I'm just gonna go break something. But this is we're rapidly approaching that point, I think, if we've not already gotten there, where the industry and sophistication of threat actors surpasses some of the good guys' creativity in industry, and that's interesting to me.
Well, let me put it to you this way, though, because I actually don't think that they innovate up. I think they innovate down, right? There's this Bruce Lee quote about, being like water, right? Like water takes the path of least resistance. So I remember, 20 years ago, how are these attacks coming in? They were weaponized Microsoft Access databases, right? And Microsoft, to their credit, fixed that. And so did the adversary try harder? No, they went after something else. They went after Microsoft Office, right? Docs or PowerPoints or whatever. And Microsoft fixed that. And the adversary was like, oh, we'll go after the browser instead, because, so they kept finding the easier path in. Fair. And as you think about this data weaponization, ransomware is hard, cryptography is hard. Let's just steal the data. Right? So they innovated down. They didn't do anything different. And by the way, they became more efficient. They simplified their process, and they're going to make more money. And similarly, we see these same things with the cloud, right? The enterprise is hard to get into, but the cloud is totally misconfigured. So it's just going through the cloud. And so they're going and with identity, right? Like, why am I going to spend all this time with exploits and tools? And I just take your username and password because you gave it to me, and I'm going to use that.
Yeah, right. All right. Well, cool, man. Thanks for sharing. I appreciate your time once again. And I wish you happy defending out there. I know a lot of people depend on you guys. So
thank you.
It's a hell of a gig to have to work. Folks, thanks for listening. That's right. Thanks for listening. This has been another an episode of the Down to Security Rabbit Hole podcast. We hope to catch you again. Hey, go check out that YouTube page. We got this and other streaming capabilities back episodes you can go watch again. And I think we actually might have your old one, Adam, as we can kind of compare and contrast as we keep going. And obviously catch us on LinkedIn, where you can always find us, and on Twitter if you're still on Twitter. And for James and I, and thanks, Adam, from CrowdStrike. We'll catch you guys another time, another place.